Sony's Spider-Man movies aren't that great, and let's be honest, Madam Web, Craven, and Venom 3 probably won't be any better. But on the off chance that they do change the trend, 2024 is going to be a make or break year for Sony Pictures, and their Spider-Man cinematic universe is definitely on the line. My name is Lewis, and welcome to the channel that loves Spider-Man just as much as you do. Sony are the type of people to hop on a trend and think it's still cool. Kind of like 2000s kids trying to grow a mullet. Actually, I think mullets are kind of back in fashion now, so I don't think that really works. Either way, my point is that Sony are very late to the cinematic universe party, with Marvel already starting theirs back in 2008, and DC attempting it for the last 10 years. Sony already tried with the Amazing Spider-Man movies to create an expanded universe, but that failed dramatically. And since then, they have gone on to hand Spider-Man over to the more successful expanded universe and carried on making movies about Spider-Man's villains. Okay. And so far, they haven't really been that great. And next year, we have 3 Sony Spider-Man films hitting the theaters. And to be honest with you, if one of them is actually any good, I'll be extremely surprised. We have Madam Web coming out in February, Craven in August, and Venom in November. And according to reports, Madam Web is meant to be really important to the future of Sony's universe, as it's going to introduce elements of the multiverse. Once again, late to the party. But there have been rumors that it's going to connect elements of the animated Spider-Verse films, Tobey and Andrew's films, and even parts of the MCU and Tom Holland's Spider-Man. There was also supposed to be a plot leak for Venom 3 around half a year ago now that said Venom 3 was meant to be a loose sequel to Madam Web and also include elements of the multiverse. And it was also made very clear that this was all set up off the back of the vague crossover into the MCU Venom had during the end of Venom 2 and No Way Home. So it's fair to say that this year is incredibly important to Sony's future and Sony's Marvel Spider-Man universe. However, there will be a few bumps in the road, and there are a few things that could definitely hold them back, and they may not be what you think they are. The first thing is actually Tom Holland. Now you may be thinking, what has Tom Holland got to do with Sony's Spider-Man universe? Well, I'll tell you. He's actually tied closer to that universe than you may initially think, and it may end up being a problem for Sony in the future. Given the multiverse stuff that's happening right now and reports about how Sony wants to be more included in MCU affairs, the inclusion of Tom Holland's Spider-Man is going to be a massive boost to this merge that is rumored to occur after Avengers Secret Wars. Once again, it's also been rumored that with Rhino making an appearance in the Craven movie, Michael Keaton's version of Adrian Toomes being transported to the Sonyverse and approaching Morbius, that a version of the Sinister Six is coming down the line, and it would not surprise me if that was to actually happen. But the thing is, when there's a Sinister Six, there has to be a Spider-Man. Well, who would they face? Well, they have 2 options. First option is Sony's own version of Spider-Man, possibly even Miles Morales. However, since they included Michael Keaton's Vulture in this very loosely built up Sinister Six arc that they're doing, I don't think that really makes any sense. I mean, Adrian Toomes is smarter than that. He's gonna know that's not his Peter Parker, or whoever they go with. So I think the more obvious answer, and the second option, is Tom Holland's Spider-Man. They are definitely building to some sort of crossover with Tom Holland coming over to the Sonyverse, or the Sony villains going to the MCU. And once again, with all of the rumors that Sony wants to push a merge with the MCU, this doesn't surprise me. Not to mention, a Venom Spider-Man crossover is almost certainly on the horizon as well. And who did Venom seem to be infatuated with at the end of Venom 2? Yeah, that's right, Tom Holland's Spider-Man. All the evidence suggests that Sony's universe is closer with the MCU and Tom Holland's Spider-Man than first thought. And if Tom Holland's deal falls through, this could annihilate all of the plans that Sony has for its universe and its characters. We know that Tom Holland is still in the middle of signing contracts for MCU Spider-Man 4, so if he decides to not go through and do any more with this character, then this could pretty much destroy Sony's universe. And that's reason 1 as to why this next year is make or break for Sony's Spider-Man universe. Tom Holland decides to not sign that contract, it's pretty much going to destroy most of their plans that it seems they have building up. Now, maybe this problem is fixable. They could easily sign someone else to play Spider-Man just in their universe, or they could even do Miles Morales, or they could even try and pry Andrew Garfield back into the fold as well. However, this still isn't their biggest problem for their movies coming out next year. Sony's biggest problem that they have going into 2024 is themselves. You see, Sony has been trying to push themselves onto the MCU for years. Ever since Homecoming came out in 2017, Sony exec Amy Pascal has mentioned on multiple occasions that the Venom movies and the Sony movies would be in the same world and would run adjacent to the MCU Spider-Man movies.
They will be connected to each other as well.
This was obviously proved to be just her chatting utter bollocks, but it still stands that Sony wanted this to happen. Sony are pushing their movies and themselves to be closely tied to the MCU as possible, but the issue that they have is that they're not very good at handling Spider-Man. When Spider-Man is left to creatives like Spider-Man 1 and 2, the Spider-Verse movies, and to some extent TASM 1, filmmakers and writers can prove how good Spider-Man can be. However, for example, whenever Sony decides to interfere with the Spider-Man movies, they all seem to have one thing happen to them. Yeah, they're all bad. They're very bad. Thus, we have examples like Spider-Man 3, in which it was clear that Sandman was meant to be the main villain, but Avi Arad wanted Venom. We then get TASM 2, where it was clear that the focus was a romantic-driven narrative surrounding Peter and Gwen, but was unfortunately overshadowed by Sony's obsession to set up a cinematic universe. So yeah, Sony aren't very good at making Spider-Man movies when they decide to get involved themselves. So it's safe to say that the MCU, and Disney especially, don't want Sony anywhere near the MCU, because if they are, and they start injecting their characters into those Spider-Man movies, things could go horribly wrong. It was already too far for Disney to let them take Vulture from the MCU. I had no idea who signed that off. And this is exactly why Sony need to prove themselves with their movies in 2024. Because Disney and Marvel aren't going to want Sony anywhere near the MCU. Even though the MCU is going through a little bit of a rough patch, the MCU generally has a very, very good reputation with fans and critics, and it's also got a good reputation financially as well. Sony pretty much don't hit the mark on any of these points. The only one that they do is Venom, which it did quite good financially, and some fans like it, but that's about it. Pretty much every other movie has bombed, the fans hate it, and the critics hate it as well. If I was Disney, I wouldn't want Sony anywhere near my cinematic universe. They need, at the very least, mediocre critical success with 2 of their 3 movies, and need one of their films to be a critical success outright. And I think the biggest candidate for success in 2024 is going to be Venom 3. Venom has already had 2 movies to find its feet, and I think if they take the elements of the first 2 films that worked and expand upon them more, it should be a decent film. As for Craven and Madam Web, I think they just need to not suck absolute balls, okay? Speaking of Madam Web though, I'm actually quite excited for it. And no, it's not because who the cast is. Yeah, I see you. Madam Web from the comics in the 90s Spidey cartoon has always been a character that intrigued me, and I think the idea of adapting some very niche Spider-Man comics that the mainstream aren't aware of is quite a nice idea. Obviously, it could go horribly wrong, but the expectations are low. It's not like they're adapting the death of Gwen Stacy, a well-renowned Spider-Man story, you know, that's definitely never gone horribly wrong ever before, you know? This movie is low-key, and I like that. I think it's fresh and sort of interesting, and the fact that they are teasing inheritors, and it kind of feels like this movie and the Spider-Verse movies are on the edge of tampering with Morlun, kind of feels like it's inevitable until he shows up, which is why it gives me the chills, because it's kind of like how they treated Thanos in the first 2 phases of the MCU. But yeah, sidetracking aside, 2024 is a massive year for Sony Pictures. They need to prove themselves, they need to make sure Tom Holland gets his contract sorted out, and they need to make good movies, because if they don't, all of their plans of trying to tie themselves closer with the MCU, trying to get Tom Holland to appear in their movies, is all going to come crashing down, and all of this, all of the Sony stuff that they're building up with Madam Web, with Venom, is all going to be worth absolutely nothing. That being said, thank you guys for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Take care and peace.